So see, I can't see my screen on my computer is what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Good morning, everybody. We are going to be live here in just a minute with our co-host Clyde Posley and our guest coming on in the second hour, advertising their book, Your Three Paths Out of Paradise, book number 1, a journal for millennials. So the emphasis here today is on mentoring millennials, key idea coming out of this particular program today. When you pick us up later on, as you see the stream, check us out, check out their books. Go to Eden Consulting, that's EDEN consulting.org.com, and then check out what they have to offer there. We are on the corner of 2131 East 10th Street. Looking forward to going live here in just a minute with YouTube Live.
So how you feeling, man?
Good, man.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and so Karen chose not to go, and so Mary said, please, we can't, that's 2 weeks, we'll give you 2 weeks. And I'll schedule the transition at the house so that the residents will secure, because it was mostly program houses that we had. And so I did the transition. My 2 weeks of time, I gotta go. This is not for me. We're about helping people get from homelessness. And so you guys are.
I'm gonna start my computer and see if my team
or some people like, what kind of job you do.
Let me know when we go.
Your commercial's coming in now.
Okay. I'm having a hard time hearing.
I know. Hey guys, hey. Tell I'm ready to come in there.
That's pretty cool. Where are you building it at? Oh, right here. Really? That's awesome. That's awesome.
10 seconds.
That's pretty cool.
Go ahead.
And we are on Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We come to you every Wednesday morning from King Christians throughout Indianapolis who are doing good. That is our focus and focal point always, from Titus chapter 3, verses 1, 8, and 14. We are located here on the lovely corner of 2131 East 10th Street, right across the street from the Bonner Center. Great things going on here. HB's got brand new programming every morning from 9 until 10. He comes in with folks who are here on 10th Street doing good things, Christians and others in the neighborhood doing good. Here in our particular program, Warp and Woof Radio, we are interested in the warp and the woof of all of life. Now, warp and woof simply means the vertical horizontal threads that make up fabric. And from a Christian vantage point, we are always interested in seeing all things linked through Jesus. So the emphasis will always be from Colossians chapter 1, verse 17, by him, by Jesus, are all things held together. And of course, Comenius is the sponsor of this particular radio show. Comenius Institute is an organization here in Indianapolis, like 35 other Christian study centers around the United States that line up next to public universities. We are interested in communicating with Christian young people, other faculty and students, whomever, about thinking through the issues, the great concerns and ideas of this particular time and place in which we live. So there are 35 of us around the United States, linked in various ways. We do ministry with students and faculty and institutions in different ways. But in our particular case, our emphasis and our interest is specifically in helping students to think through their academics from a decidedly Christian point of view. So we meet once one-on-one, one in small group. We have an emphasis always on the same kind of idea, and that is just listening to students, asking them, hey, what are you interested in? What are you studying right now? What have you heard in class? What's going on around campus? What is it that we can do to help the process? So our first bridge that we cross at the Comenius Institute is into the college. That is at the college at IUPUI for the Comenius Institute. And then the second bridge that we cross is into communities. And The radio show that we are invested in right now is actually the basis for our connection to communities in and around Indianapolis. And so, as I've suggested already, our focus is on people, Christians around Indianapolis who are doing good, connect with each other. Not anything different from what we are already doing here this morning. We have two doctors coming in, doctors in their right, in their field of expertise. Dr. Dennis Humphrey, Dr. John Erickson. They have a wow background to all kinds of connections throughout the world and their experiences. So our interest is in communities, linking communities, with a special emphasis on Black and white relations, connecting Christian Black and white leaders throughout Indianapolis. And our co-host, Dr. Clyde Posley, will be coming in. He is African-American pastor here at the Antioch Baptist Church, downtown Indianapolis. So one of the things that folks comment on a regular basis on social media is this idea that you have a Black PhD and a white PhD in the same picture, shaking hands, working together. How about that? Isn't that a news flash? And quite frankly, for some folks, it is. So communities is the second bridge that we focus on. And the third bridge is into culture. So we're always interested in thinking through how do we think differently as Christians about whatever cultural interests and issues there might be. And just as a snapshot for something going forward, something to look forward to, not only do we have our ongoing series now, Truth in Two, which is an emphasis on the channel, but also you can find there this new documentary preview. We've just been working on the documentary throughout the summertime. Josh Collingswood, our tech guy, is actually putting this together, doing a yeoman's job with this. Can't wait to see the final product of what he puts together about the background and the intersection of all things at Comenius Institute. So the cultural bridge is the third bridge that we cross, and our focus is always on the same thing every single week, to bring Christians together so that we might speak to each other about what is of interest and what is important to us, the kinds of intersections that we are making in the community. This is going to be a huge concern for us. Just before we go to break, I wanted to say to everybody that this particular program today is on serving emerging adults. And for those of you who don't get the YouTube live, I wanted to read for you. This is from John D. Erickson. That's Erickson. Longing for Eden. This is the 3 Paths Out of Paradise. This is book number 1. These gentlemen have put together a mentoring firm that helps millennials in particular, the next generation. We call them next gen leaders. These are the folks who are going to be taking over those of us who are in positions of agedness, which I count myself in now that I'm 61. So there you go. This emphasis, of course, is always going to be the same, where we are highlighting those good folks who are doing good, Christians around Indianapolis. And these guys are coming in today talking about serving emerging adults. So in our first hour, after our first break here, we're going to be talking about the concept of mentoring, the biblical model for such, and we'll become that. Take a 1-song break. We'll be right back.
What's up, man? What's happening with you?
Yesterday we spent, I don't know, 3-4 hours. I was with Polly and Josh over at IUPUI. We were doing taping for the Truth in Two series and then also for the documentary. Polly and I were working on some new prospects about, organization stuff, getting my email system set up in a way that we can communicate with people quickly about Comenius. So that's the big deal.
Good.
Yeah, so that's moving down the road, and I've just got to do the detail work to get her the detail work so that she can kind of take over the detail work. That's the whole point to this. So I'm looking forward to having that thing finished and going on in the future. Actually, Clyde just sent me a message here saying that he won't be in the second hour. So we've got 3 people coming in the second hour, so I won't be giving up my seat here. Merlin Gonzalez is coming back to join us as well.
Oh, today?
Yeah. So he'll be sitting in, talking with these guys. It'll be great. Looking forward to this. Just for the sake of knowledge, 2 weeks from now, July 4th, we will not be doing a show. Okay. And let's see, one other update would be August 1st. I've already communicated with Dr. Posley about this, but that's my orientation and IUPUI, so he'll be in charge of that day. But we got folks pretty much lined up through the second week in August already. That's good. Yeah. So Luke's back.
He just came to visit.
Just came to visit.
Well, he came to visit. Plus, he's trying to get a job at the Bonner Center. And,
okay.
All
right.
Yeah,
got that.
Need you.
Yeah.
They be in there when they need you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So,
there's that.
I had to pray and ask Lord for, that guidance.
Patience, peace, and perseverance.
Absolutely.
When I think about perseverance in the Bible, I have your name and picture.
I love it.
Yeah. Not only because you got that cool poster over there.
That ain't the only reason why.
Just because I see it, man, week in and week out. Yeah, it's all about that. So these are good things. Good things are happening. It's like somebody was on for just a moment and then took off again. I always put up the YouTube live connection now so that in case our mom wants to watch us, that kind of thing might be helpful.
Have a good show.
Thank you, Laura. Good
I'll
to
get
see
with you, girl.
I just want to say again, man, how much I like these window things.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever they call them, I don't know, but they're really cool. How's things working out around here?
Cool, man. Just, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Doing a lot of painting in here, I can smell.
Yeah.
It's all right. We get that done. We get the flooring done. Get this place shaped up.
It's a lot of little shit be happening, like my team viewer. Trying to figure out what in the hell happened to my team viewer. I'm trying to get my team viewer reconnected so I can do it out of there. Get that door for me, please.
Hey, John, would you mind getting the door for Dennis? Thanks. Hey, I'm good. Have a good one.
All right, Luke. Be in touch, man.
Yep.
Ten seconds.
And we are back. Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. at the corner of 2131 East 10th Street, Bonner, right across the street from the Bonner Center. We're really happy to be with you every single week. Glad to bring folks who are invested in Indianapolis, Christians who are doing good around the community. Today, we're talking about the idea of mentoring, concerned about serving emerging adults. And one of the keys, of course, to this is this concept of where does this come from in Scripture? And we want to emphasize the concept of a biblical model of mentoring that acknowledges how important this is for us. So let's start with one of those passages that really seems pretty easy, pretty straightforward to us, which comes out of 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1. 1 Corinthians 11:1 says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." Now that word imitators, by the way, is a very interesting word. Literally in Greek, the word there is mimic. And so we actually use the word mimic in our English language, but the concept of imitation, mimicry, same kind of idea coming out of the original language in the New Testament, which is a very powerful concept here. So when we talk about a biblical model, we talk about mentoring as mimicking. Well, how does mimicking take place? I think that's a really important concept as we think about how the process of mentoring takes place. So from my vantage point, I'll suggest that I have lots of different people that I'm mentoring at lots of different levels and lots of different ways and lots of different places. Just to give some examples of this, my good friend Maddie Montgomery lives out in Mobile, Alabama. Maddie, for 10 years, was the front man for the Today Band. Great band, great Christian rocker out of Alabama. Well, he has a brand new group now called Awakening Evangelism. He has 50,000 followers on Twitter, all kinds of folks invested in his programming. But he and I text and talk on a regular basis. And one of the things that he invests himself with me is this concept of writing books. So he's got a brand new book coming out called Scary God. He's, of course, communicating with a whole different demographic, a whole different group of folks, certainly in the millennial age group. Maddie Montgomery is one of those voices to be heard. But from a distance, my mentoring with Maddie takes place. He texts me from Poland or Australia or wherever he's at, and we text and talk about the kinds of things that are most important to him. When I think about mentoring in terms of a young person that is invested in this process, I also think of those who are committed to us at the Comenius Institute. So when we talk about the issue of Comenius Institute and mentoring there, we're concerned with young people who are doing the kinds of things that they do at school, which is school. So one of the things that just happened just last evening, for instance, one of our students there at Comenius connected with us. The connection was, hey, I need to talk. So Robin and I talked for about an hour with this young person. And they're going through some very difficult times, some very difficult situations. And all of that to say, we spent about an hour with them on the phone. So in this particular case, our focus at the Comenius Institute, and specifically in the concept of mentoring, is to help people wherever they're at with whatever is going on in their lives. And a concern, of course, that we model for them a biblical vantage point and an imitative positive role model that is a crucial concern for us. Good morning, my brother. Good to see you today.
Good morning. How are you?
Good to see you. Good, thank you. We're grateful for the kind of mentoring that you do too. And one of the things that is really powerful to me whenever we have a chance to talk is how many of these young people's lives you are invested with throughout your years. You know, you've talked about the 40 or 50 young people that you've invested part of your life in. Talk about that for a moment.
Oh, yeah. A lot of that, is tied into my ministry. But I'm blessed to have about 59 sons and daughters in the ministry and the faith that I've either helped go to school, directed to school, biblical college, or not biblical college. Or some have gone to seminary, and I have about 3 PhD candidates.
Wow!
In our congregation, 2 PhD candidates and one other PhD. So it's just a privilege to participate in what the scripture calls training up a child in the way that they should go. And with the intent to trust God that when they're older, they will not depart. And there's a biblical platform for how we should do this. In Psalm 119, the Bible deals with the human condition of all people, and it specifically speaks to cleansing the way of young people. It says, how else shall a young man cleanse his way but by taking heed hereunto the word of God? And so what the principle that's being lifted there is that according to scripture, there is no way for youth to understand clearly what their path should be. No way that excludes God's help, God's voice, God's instructions, patterns that we see in people. And in the New Testament, Ephesians 6:13 says that we should follow those who through faith and patience have inherited. Well, it starts off by saying, be not slothful.
Don't be slothful.
First thing we want to do is not be lazy.
There you go.
You know, don't be procrastinator. Don't intentionally not do what needs to be done, but instead pick a person. Let God give you a person after whom you can pattern your life, and find how this should be done. I think often the Bible uses the term, as you often use, mimic. Paul talks about he wanted the people to mimic him. And young people need to not be so afraid to mimic someone. That's what fathers are for. That's what mentors are for. That's what teachers are for, to give you a tangible example of what God is trying to get you to see and be. That's why Christ came.
This concept of mentoring is especially important when we think about the importance of young men for the future. And I know I'm not leaving out our fair gender of ladies here, but since we're men, one of the things that concerns us and our focal point is about the next generation of men that are coming up. I know, for instance, one of your right-hand men at your church, Shaquan Eli, is there, and a PhD candidate, and a very strong Christian brother who's has a great voice and testimony. Talk a moment about how important it is to train up men.
Well, the men are progenitors in every way. In every way, spiritually, physically, emotionally. We are seed bearers. We plant. We place into a situation the life of it, positively or negatively.
Or negatively, yes.
Yeah, positively or negatively. And so, I heard a young rapper speaking one time about how the women are most important in the world. They carry you. Yeah, women are fantastic, and we know, but we can't get out of God's design. Women nurture what has been placed in them, and so it's important to teach young men that you are the seed bearer. Your speech, your choices, the paths you take are all setting a standard, giving a direction. You are a leader. Technically, and this can be argued, a man doesn't have to try to be a leader. You're born a leader. You're born a head, whether you like that or not. You're born a head, and you are going to be leading something. What training and mentoring is designed to do is to help you do it wisely. Help you do it biblically. But you are a young man. You are designed. Every young person is designed to be a head, and every young lady, based on the way Scripture has designed things, is designed to help. That's not less than a head. You know that we quit that concept. But perfect for God's design is what we're trying to get people to become, and that concept. We have to stay in those roles. I was driving down the street the other day, real quick, Dr. Eccles, and a guy was cracking a joke, and he thought it was funny, but he was really onto a biblical principle that many people have missed. I'm going somewhere with this. why it's so important for men to learn, to be the head, and not just to be the head, but to be leaders, to let themselves get taught mayat, the wisdom. Here's why. This guy was joking about marriage. He said every marriage has trouble. He said even Adam and Eve had trouble. And it reminded me of some teaching I had when I went to school, and that is even the very first marriage had trouble. The very first marriage. And Adam failed. He failed to walk in his role as a leader. And it cost us because he was outside of the instructions of leadership that he had been given. The scripture says he had been given. Much of what is wrong with the world today, I would dare say most of what is wrong with the world today, not just sin, but it is men who have not allowed God to influence what their role as leaders should look like.
And that goes back to the word of God you say so ably mentioned just a moment ago from Psalm 119. And of course, just coming off Father's Day, it's one of the reasons why I mentioned this, the connection to this. In a couple of weeks, I'll be preaching on Joshua chapter 2 at my own church, that famous story of Rahab. And one of the application points that I want to point out to folks about Rahab is the necessity of strong women leaders. And that, I think, is an important something that we need to emphasize as well. So let's talk for a moment about the necessity of women who are building into or nurturing, as you well suggested earlier, into life and into their families and into the communities.
There is no fulfillment. There's no ultimate fulfillment of manhood and a man's purpose on earth without the influence of women. It's not possible. I didn't say one could not achieve what we consider quote unquote success. I didn't popularity or fame, or even some semblance of purpose. Yes. But every God has arranged it, designed it, so that all of what a man ultimately becomes is influenced by a woman. None of us. I have been a single Christian man, and I've been a married Christian man. I prefer to be a married Christian man. God said something about man that we don't hear much about in the very beginning, and whether a person is the essentialist or existentialist, we can debate. But there's some essential truths that are real about God. Meaning there's some root things we need to remember that God has said. One of them is, it is not good for man to be alone.
There you go.
This is huge. What this and so thus there are Rahabs, there are Hildas, there are the sisters of Jesus, of Lazarus. There are women throughout Scripture that God used to help men accomplish what God designed them to accomplish. And I dare say, I go so in my view, I go so far as to say, not only are they valuable, they are essential. In other words, none of us, if we be honest as men, we wouldn't be, we can't accomplish what we need without women, without the power, the intellect, the discipline, the mental discipline of women.
Let me add to your list and bring in my wife's favorite woman Bible character, which is Huldah out of 2 Kings. Here is, boy, talk about doing some hermeneutical butt kicking in the Old Testament. Here we have this woman who says, the king finds the scroll. Of course, the priests, the prophets, they find the scroll and they're not sure what to do with it. So they call in the woman hermeneutist to take care of the issue. The interpreter is the woman. I think it's really important for us to recognize, let's make the segue now into the general population of millennials and young adults. How important is it for us to say to young people, look, we are not interested in doing this till we're 80. Okay, we're interested in building into you in our 50s and into our 60s. We need to hand the baton off. People use different metaphors for this. Let's talk about the necessity of the next generation of leadership coming up.
Yeah, succession and godly succession is not only a biblical thing. It's a necessity. Physically, we're not designed to do this until we're 80. It's just not what God. Moses died at 120, but that's not God's plan for how the fact that our physical bodies, you could eat right, exercise daily, do everything known under the sun physically. At 80, 90, you're not going to be running and doing just the physical strength. And so we need to train a group that physically is once where we were.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to train them not only in what we have to say to them, but by what they see us do.
Let me just make that connection then to Comenius, because as you well know, we've talked about this. The plan, generally speaking, about what the future holds for this organization is this emphasis of what we have to do into the future. And we've talked about the necessity of the executive director of this organization being a younger African-American man whom we can help with a PhD through a PhD program, who can then become a professor and academic here in Indianapolis, who can be a spotlight so that as the years go by, you know, this person is hired, we walk arm in arm, hand in hand down the road. But eventually, you know, this person just kind of takes over and I kind of fade to the background. I think this is essential. And of course, as you and I well suggest, one of the reasons for this very program, bringing cultures together, is the necessity of saying, you know what, Black leadership matters, and a white man wants to make sure that that happens within this organization.
Right. And within and not only within the organization, but for the purpose of the evolution that is occurring in society.
Yes.
You know, we must accept the fact that while sin and the presence of sin is universal, the practice of sin and the methods to bring about sin are ever evolving. Satan is constantly honing his skills of temptation and how we carry out sin. He's got it on earth now. And so now he's working at several ways to help us. While the scripture does say there's nothing new under the sun, it's new to this culture.
That's right.
It's new to this culture.
Yeah.
And so we need to train young people to understand, to hear this culture's cries, this culture's pain, and take the energy and the aptitude and mix it together with wisdom to bring about change. Because aptitude without energy is kind of useless.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know, and wisdom without energy and true aptitude is kind of alone. It's like a person with a bunch of wisdom sitting on a hill doesn't have the courage to come down doing anything about it. Excuse me, the energy to come down doing anything about it. No, we need to train young people, and we have to somehow convince them that we believe in them. We need them, and they need us.
And one of the things that stands out in you know, the kind of work that you're doing, kind of work that we're doing at Comenius, is that we actually want the church today in 2018 in the United States of America to look like Revelation 5, to look like Revelation 7 and 9. And so this interconnectivity between ethnicities, we need to be the persons that step out and say, you know what, we're going to model this for you. This is something that's so important to us. So we're talking about this concern about serving emerging adults and the next generation. So we want to be the models for those folks who are stepping into the next generation.
Absolutely.
One of the things that stands out to me when I think about this is are the books of Thessalonians, which, if you haven't read Thessalonians lately, it won't take you long. If you take 1 Thessalonians, it'll take about 10 minutes to read that book. When you read 1 Thessalonians, one of the things that stands out to you is the emphasis on the things that are yet to come. In fact, every single chapter, there are 5 chapters in 1 Thessalonians, and one of the things that sits out to you, or stands out to all of us, is this necessity to understand that there is a future coming. So at the end of each of our chapters in Thessalonians, there's an anticipation of a life yet to come. But what is the emphasis all the way through the book? The emphasis is, I am giving my lifeblood. I'm giving all of my energy to you. What does Paul say in chapter 2? I've become a father and a mother to you. I've worked all night long so that I might not be a burden to you. He says this over and over and over again. He's literally building up this next generation. Right. And the importance of creating this positive role model is essential for us. So we see that throughout the book of Thessalonians. And one of the great things that he says right in the first chapter, in fact, he says, you know, I come into your town and I don't even need to speak of the gospel because you've already done that. Here's testimony to the modeling that Paul has already done for the Thessalonians.
That's right. And another truth about the church of Thessalonica that's relevant today is they had been taught, they had received ill teaching. They had been told by some people who had their own agenda. The resurrection wasn't real, that there was no such thing as they never heard of a rapture. And Paul had to explain he had to undo a lot of what the culture had taught them, which is why he was so tenderhearted with the church at Thessalonica, because he recognized that some of their concerns, some of their behavior was what them falling prey to some of the erroneous teachings of the era. You know, whenever you, not to echo, one true principle is maybe not that profound, but if you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas. You know, a lot of times, association brings assimilation.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have a culture of young people today who need mentoring, who need examples, because there is a culture of young people who have been who've seen bad models and whose opportunities they think are dwindling to get out of rough situations or to get out of abusive situations, and they have to be mentored out. They have to be taught out. They have to be almost debriefed so that they get brainwashed, a washing of the thoughts. Well, their minds, Romans 12 and 2 will call 12 and chapter 2 will call it not conformed to this world, but be transformed by renewing their minds. A lot of young people are hardened against any instructions because the formative years of their lives, like the church of Thessalonica, was steeped in harsh treatment, lies about who you are, lies about God, lies, exemplary and examples of people, wrong things, judgment, legalism, and you're going to hell if you do this, and God doesn't love people of your race. God doesn't, and so there's a transformation often necessary in order to mentor. You almost have to detoxify their thinking.
Oh my, yeah.
And then implement something better.
This is a huge concern for us as we set examples. In fact, if we pick up on that word example in Greek, one of the things that we find, actually it's repeated in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, the Greek for the word example is the word type or imprint. It's literally a mark that's left from a blow or a design stamped on a coin, leaving a pattern, something to be copied and followed. And so the emphasis is on something to be result oriented. And I know we live in a culture where result orientation or production is based on things, whereas in the Christian view of life and things, we are more concerned with people and ideas than we are with reproducing things.
Right. A changed life is the goal.
Yes.
And that really I'm not intending to go back, but that goes back to the mindset of many young people in this world, that success is stuff.
Yes.
Bling, they call it bling. He's got this or she's got that, or they're famous or they're on TV, so they must be. Cash does not necessarily, character is not necessarily seen because a person has cash.
Yeah, that's right. So the emphasis, of course, is not on things, but on people.
Riches of this world.
Isn't that the truth? And just as a side comment, I want to say, I've been saying this for years. One of the things that just really grinds on me is when we call call what we say this area of business as human resources. I have never liked that phrase. It's a phrase that suggests that I'm going to use you, and then when you're used up, I'm going to throw you away. If we could at least, people, anybody listening from the HR departments, if we could at least go back to personnel departments where we have the emphasis on person, could we please do that? Of course, the emphasis there on being made in God's image. Well, before we take a break here in about 5-7 minutes, before we bring in our guests here in the second hour, I wanted to talk about a little bit about the metaphors that we find of ourselves establishing models for others. And so I've just listed 3 of them here. One of them is called Walk the Line, from Romans 4:12, Acts 21:24, and elsewhere. Follow in his footsteps or tracks is something that's mentioned in 2 Corinthians 12, 1 Peter 2. And then the word devotion, literally giving up yourself to be with other people. Let's play around with those concepts for a moment and the importance of the pictures that we present to young people, to emerging adults. How do we pictorially, visually communicate to them in a way that is going to say to them, you know what, the best way for you to learn is to follow me? What kind of pictorial ideas do we or should we be utilizing in our own culture that suggests to millennials, it suggests to emerging adults that, hey, you know what, we have an opportunity here to do something different, and here's a picture of that for us?
Well, that's some question, because it's required for the young people's success. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs, chapter 28, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so that suggests to us that pictorials in the mind are how we keep folk from perishing. And so, you know, in an age of social media, it's good. We got to somehow start there. You know, in my mind, what images they are seeing, not just in pattern, but in terms of mentors and the lifestyle, but what images they're seeing. I think television is playing a major role. You know, if you go back, you know, and I know the Old Testament is a tremendous place for your training. And as you know, the book of Deuteronomy, God implemented the concept of imaging in Deuteronomy chapters 4-6. How write it on the eyelids, write it on the doorpost. Right. So what God was doing was imaging, marketing himself, marketing truth, trying to implant it in the mind. This is not the show for it, but there's something to be said about painting pictures in the minds of people. And Kamish Nunley, was it Jason Laster's name? They could probably speak better to this than I. But we have to come up with a way, even if it may sound radical, but we have to begin to confront, because the devil is always painting pictures. He's always trying to find ways to blast, either with words or with negative, you know, images that people have been tricked into believing are positive. It's a major question.
It is. It's an important question to consider when we consider First Testament teaching. I'll just give some examples of this and mention Simon Sinek for just a moment, and I'll come back to him. But of course, Simon Sinek has become a major player in leadership emphases. And one of the things that he put out there was the importance of the golden circles and the question of why. Back in 2009, he did a TED Talk on this. Well, what's fascinating, and what I tell my students about this when we watch the TED Talk, is that Simon Sinek got his stuff right out of Exodus and Deuteronomy. Because when God said, I'm going to put blood on the lintels, on the doorposts, so that the angel of death will pass over your house and not wipe out your ancestors or your progeny, or when they line up a pile of rocks down by the Jordan River in Joshua chapter 4, what does God say over and over and over again? When your son asks you why.
Absolutely.
So Simon Sinek got his stuff from ancient texts, namely that the emphasis is always on the why question. So I make that comment and make that point to come back to our visual analysis. If we're going to be training emerging adults. If we're going to be thinking about millennials and the importance of next gen leadership, we need to think in terms of visualization, in terms of how we're going to communicate in a direct, simple way. One of the reasons that, for instance, we've started a whole series of Truth and Two in Comenius is that we can communicate one Christian idea in 2 minutes of time, and it's always story-based. Story will always communicate with everybody. It's a baseline visual concept that everybody relates to. Certainly, leaders into the future are going to be using story. Certainly something that we should be thinking about in terms of when we're modeling this for others, what kind of visual representations are we putting in front of them so that they look at that and say, that not only is a personal relationship I have with this person, but now it's imprinted on my thinking, on the doorpost of my mind, as it were.
You know, I'm just thinking, I'm sitting there listening. Those things you said are absolutely profound. Just sitting there thinking about how we present text as humans.
Ooh, how do we present text as humans? Go.
You know,
yes.
You know, if you look at the age, you know, one of the things happening today is a proliferation of body art. Body art,
okay.
You know, and tattoos. You know, I'm not saying anyone's going to hell because they have a tattoo. That's not no. But we have a culture of people who in increasing manner is trying to say things to us by painting their bodies. Some even mutilating their body to try to speak to us. I mean, these are just things that we need to consider when we're trying, because if we're going to mentor a culture, we have to hear them. We have to hear what they're saying.
Right.
You know, again, I don't want to get into, you know, someone else's field, but what does it say when we have an increasing number? You see professional athletes, you see celebrities, people who are not professional athletes,
people walking in the street in front of us.
You know, and I just walked and noticed all these people. Just everyone, I've noticed a tattoo on every one of them.
Every person.
And they are saying, what is the broader thing? They are saying something.
Something.
What is a culture feeling that feels they need to speak to us in alternative ways? What does it say about what they think about what we're hearing about them?
This goes back to your good comment about text and how do we communicate text in a culture of pictures?
Because there's a multiplicity of ways that Mark Rocker suggests this. There's a multiplicity of ways that society presents text that are words that are not written.
Yes.
And it's used, and often we miss narratives.
That's right.
That are key to learning the people we seek to mentor, because we often have trouble reading their chosen text.
One of the things, just make a comment about this quickly. I'm going to be teaching this course, Reading, Writing, and Inquiry at IUPUI. We've talked about this for a moment in the past, but I emphasize this to say that every single class hour, I'm going to be playing different kinds of music. I think you and I have talked about this before. And the reason why I'll be playing different kinds of music is to connect with the music that encourages, uplifts, energizes, invests itself within the students that I'll be teaching.
Which is a part of the humanities.
Right, so that they see this, hey, you know, there's a prof there that actually cares about my stuff.
Right, absolutely. There is another text. There's much for you to gather from their music, their response to their music, and their response to you playing their music.
Yes.
You know, that there's just so much. Of course, for obvious reasons, I believe that the humanities represent the most important hermeneutical opportunities for us.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Yeah, preach it, brother. That's right. And I'm so pleased to be able to participate in that at IUPUI here this coming fall. But of course, this is your field. This is something where you've earned your PhD in the humanities, specifically in political science. There's a whole field. And by the way, we're going to be talking with an up-and-coming African-American leader here in the city, July 18th. Is it July 18th? That Wednesday. He's running for a seat here in the city council. We'll be talking with him actually about politics and how to be a Christian in politics in Indianapolis. That'll be a great show. Everybody want to tune in for that one as well. Well, we're going to be taking a break here in just a couple minutes as we kind of land this first hour. We want to take a 2-song break, but when we come back, we're going to be engaged with a couple of doctors in their own right. Doctors Dennis Humphrey and Dr. John Erickson are coming in from Eden Consulting. They're going to be talking about their work with the emerging adults that they serve, millennials, young people who are coming up as next-gen leaders. We talk about next-gen with our little bit of a hashtag there in front of that. And we'll be talking with them, asking them to tell their stories about the importance of passing on what they have and their experience in their lives into the next generation of young people. And we're really, of course, happy to establish some biblical guidelines here, as we always do in the first hour. Dr. Cloud, it's always a pleasure to be with you and chat with you about the world that we live in and how do we communicate in this way. And of course, you've been doing a series. You're ending your series this week, right, on mental health.
I'm going to give it a shot.
Okay.
I'm going to try to end it.
Okay.
Mental health and the Christian church.
Yeah.
And the Christian mission, rather. Mental health and Christian mission. Last week, I talked about the silence of the rams. Why some men have trouble worshiping. And so this week, I'm going to be talking about mental health and some of the emotional pain that women go through. And mental health and emotional health, mental illness and emotional pain or illness or hurt is not necessarily the same thing.
And we are so pleased that you are doing the warp and woof of mental health with biblical principles. We're grateful for your leadership here in Indianapolis as a pastor, as a leader in lots of different arenas, including the academic realm. You've been listening to the first hour of Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We're going to be taking a 2-song break, but when we come back, we'll be introducing you to Doctors Humphrey and Erickson from Eden Consulting. You don't want to miss what they have to say this morning. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back after 2 songs. Yep. Okay. Yep. I've got actually an extra person coming in, so this will work out well.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, I'm
going to re-up with him. I had changed my mind, but I'm going to do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know if my church was this was a good season.
Okay.
I think it is.
All right. Okay.
And if it's not, I'm going to do it.
All right.
It needs to be done.
Okay.
I can't take it anymore.
All right.
We need to be doing Matthew chapter 25 better than what we're doing. So
let's get a picture out here of these guys.
What's the fumes going on?
Painting. They're doing all painting.
Ooh, man.
Not much ventilation.
We should step out and get the pressure there. That's right. Hey, man.
Come on over, guys. Let's get a picture.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening in.
That's right.
Yeah, well, the second hour is all about time. So, I mean, there are times, and this is going to be one of them, I'm sure. I ask one question, and you pretty much just stay on and do your thing. We will do about 12 to 15 minutes segment, and then we will do the rest of the last half hour or so. So we'll have about 45 minutes to operate.
Hey, I miss you guys.
Yeah,
How you doing?
Yes.
Let's get a picture.
So yeah, I've got to run. There's a mental health something going on at the early.
Okay. Come on in, guys,
And,
over here, so they can be
My wife is in it, so I.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Come on in, oh, that's perfect. Good stuff. Thank you. All right, gentlemen.
There's mental health in the church.
All right, my man. I'll give you a call this week.
Okay, man, good.
Yeah, I'll be listening while I'm driving.
All right.
Where would you like it, sir?
What's that?
You guys have cards?
Yeah, we do, but they're not on me right now. So
Okay.
I might have one here. Hang on just one second. I may have one in my wallet. You got one?
I don't have one of my Eden ones. I have one of my
You
own.
have one of your company ones?
Yep.
Hey, folks, when you're seeing this, of course, in the middle of all of this, we make this shift and adjustment. And in just a minute, I'm going to turn this thing around so you can see our guests, and our focal point will be on them for the rest of the show. One of the things that we've discovered here in doing this YouTube live thing, I mean, it's really nice because it automatically just loads right into YouTube, and it's great. But getting people to say, yeah, I'm going to have this on while, so most people watch it after the fact, which is interesting. We did have some interesting interactions. We have had some interesting interactions actually with folks who leave their comments, not always positive comments either, which has been a head shaker to me. I mean, we're very positive and we're focused on doing good and all those good things, and you'd think that, there wouldn't be any way that you could, but of course, somebody, someplace is going to.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm waiting for the various different circles to chime in here. Because I definitely have a perspective that they don't have.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Which is okay.
And frankly, when I got to the end of your book, I thought, the questions were the powerful pieces here that just kind of make everybody sit up and take notice and say, wow, man, I need to think about this a little bit more, and so the questions really to me are always the keys, to engagement with people.
Yeah. Eventually we're hoping once we kind of got the 4 books together, because this was all going to be one big volume, and then many people said, break this out, because millennials aren't going to read, 700 pages. So we just decided to pull this one concept of root sins is just so significant to kind of a linchpin to a lot of the rest of the things we're doing. So I decided to kind of put that in a kind of a condensed, but it's, there's just so many ways that this can be applied in so many different processes. And so we're thinking about, for the course of maybe all 4 of the books kind of get put together, that we just create a workbook or a seminar out of the whole piece. Because we've taught this material for years, this and plus the second book, which is a book on the path through conflict. We've taught that material for years in various settings, but just never written it down in any kind of that form.
Yeah. Well, frankly, and if I could be so bold as to say this, quite frankly, I'm really looking forward to the conflict book.
Yeah.
Because, that's the thing that I struggle with the most is the issue of conflict.
Yeah. So. And again, like with this, where we try to boil things down into, if you understand the 3 root sins, a lot of things become more clear in your relationships. We've done the same thing with conflict. We have a very straightforward 5-step process that if you think about these things, basically, if you're in the situation of a conflict and you lower the emotional noise and you remove the violence, you silence the shame, and you drop your entitlements and channel the spirit, conflict doesn't become a problem anymore. You actually thrive in the middle of it.
These are powerful ideas. And one of the things that was so attractive when you and I were talking, John, at this, it was at Panera, I think, we were discussing these kinds of ideas, and this was what was so attractive to me about, quite frankly, when you guys finish this next thing on conflict, you need to come back and talk again about this. And just so that I say this out loud and make sure that if I've said this before, all of this, so this is yours. So when the YouTube thing comes out, when the iTunes thing is up later today or maybe tomorrow, do with it what you want. Same with YouTube Live, obviously not anybody watching right now, but later on, you can utilize, hey, if you've got a 1-minute clip in there and you want to use that and say, boy, we really sounded good there, we really looked good today.
We did.
Feel free to, grab that and go.
Good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is, really a gift to us.
Yeah.
As we've been praying. This has been 25 years in coming.
Sure.
In many ways.
I heard that when we were talking, man. You've been around the block a time or two.
We've been percolating for a long time.
And so, when you finally start to pull it together in this form, now where I've been asking the Lord, so what do we do now? This is not my world,
Sure.
My world is talking to people and writing and preaching and stuff. It's not media. And so this is a whole new thing for me to figure this out.
Well, this is the wonder of being with HB. I got to tell you, I've been with him for 2.5 years now, and this is our 124th episode, as you saw there at the top of the page. And here's our nonprofit, and so the emphasis here is to get information out to people. That's what we're most interested in doing, and so that's going to be the crucial concern for us. So if there are folks in the future, you say, hey, Mark, you need to hear this person speak or whatever. Feel free to contact me.
That's good to know, because we obviously we run across all kinds of very interesting people.
Sure.
So
And maybe there's some way that, we can work together in the future. And I don't know what regard it might be. If you set up a venue where you have speaking engagements, I'd be happy to come alongside you guys in some way. So feel free to.
Well, we really are step by step, really seriously just walking with where the Lord takes this.
Okay.
Because we don't know.
Yeah.
A while ago, I kind of stopped planning things.
Okay.
Because the Lord kind of said, I never did anything I planned to do. And I kind of got tired of it after a while because the Lord was just shipped it around. And so.
Same here. I would try to push into something that I thought I wanted to do, and it would just be drudgery.
Okay.
But when I stop.
If I could, I'm just gonna make sure. Are you both on there?
Yeah.
Do you both look okay?
Yeah.
Well, that's a different question.
That's a different question.
As good as it can be expected.
Can you see us? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Does it
That's
look
all I
good?
wanted to
That's a different.
Well, the thing I wanted to say about the planning part is basically I've hired somebody to take care of all my tech stuff.
Yeah.
So somebody, we just were at IUPY yesterday. I was recording 10 Truth in 2 episodes. And he shoots all this, he puts it up, he's doing a documentary on Comenius. All kinds of cool things are happening that way. But he's a young guy who loves this stuff. And I just say, here, help me, just take this thing over. And if you're looking for that kind of thing, that kind of energy, that might be a way to go.
Yeah, and I think that might be because we have guys in our world that are kind of like that, do that kind of thing. We're just the other piece too is we're wondering kind of how to monetize this.
Oh yeah.
So that it becomes, we can hire somebody to do that.
Sure.
There's that. Because somebody gave me, donated the money to publish that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, quite frankly, that's not a bad way to go either.
Yeah. Well, because basically I had done so. I may even reach for that. I basically had done a bunch of marital counseling for them, and to charge them for it. They'd pay me, and so essentially they said, "Well, can we do something?" Okay. I said, "Well, you can. It's going to cost me so much money to publish this. Why don't you?" So.
All right, we got about 5 seconds before we come in. I just have to listen for my cue. And we are back. Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We come to you every Wednesday from 10 until noon. And every week we have different guests in that we're spotlighting our focus on Christians doing good around Indianapolis. And we are just so pleased today to have Drs. Humphrey and Erickson here with us from Eden Consulting, and the opportunity that they have to explain and expose what it is that they do in the emerging adult arena, specifically in what generally is referred to as the millennial generation. So we're concerned with next gen leadership today. And if you're tuning in live, or if you're tuning in the podcast later on, I'd like to introduce John Erickson and Dennis Humphrey. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
We are grateful that you have taken the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. Thank you so much. We just want to give you, as we do with all of our guests, kind of an opening salvo here. Give us a little bit about yourselves, your background. John, I know when you and I talked, you could probably take a couple days to tell me all the stuff you've done in your lifetime. I'm sure the same is true with you, Dennis. But give us just kind of an overview of where you've been in life and to the place that you've come right now.
Well, I grew up in Canada, Southern Ontario, and went to school in upstate New York where I met my wife, Heather. Eventually rotated back to Canada and then up to Chicago area for graduate school.
Okay.
And I grew up in holiness tradition, and so have deep roots with that. Currently live in the Chicago area. I have 4 children, 3 dogs, too many cars. And my background's in clinical mental health.
Okay.
And that's really where the Lord led me right from day one. And along the way, I got a chance to step into some business consulting and career development area. I got to work with a lot of top of the house C-suite people. Learned a lot from them. I like to say I got my MBA just through them. But God called me into the church, and my parents were church people. My grandfathers were churchmen, very deeply involved at the lay level. And I was called into a pastor for 3 years. I tell people that was the best job and the worst job I ever had, and I would never trade it. And so in my counseling, although I'm clinically trained and all that, I'm really have a heart for discipleship and really, if I were to describe it, my job is to help people understand their hearts, help people understand God's heart, and then draw those two together. And that's what I do.
You just have a multifaceted layering going on in your life. My word.
Yeah, lots going on. I also teach Trinity International University and Trinity Divinity School. John and I co-teach some courses there.
Great
And
school.
So, yeah,
very good.
We have that going on as well.
Well, I'm concerned that you have too many cars, especially living in Chicago, but that's another discussion, I suppose. John, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, my life, I grew up in Indianapolis, here in Indianapolis, up on the northeast side. And so I've had, my life has had basically three sections. I went to Purdue University and got an electrical engineering degree, following my dad and other people in my life. And so I wanted to go to medical school, and my dad wisely said, well, go get a degree in something you can actually get a job with when you decide not to go to medical school. And he was right. Never did go to medical school, but graduated from Purdue and went immediately to work for the United States government. I worked for the Department of the Navy for a while, and then I worked for the Department of State. And in the State Department, I was immediately assigned to the security detail for the Secretary of State, which was George Shultz at the time. So lots of stories around following the Secretary of State and the President around the world as they prosecuted the Cold War. Some really good things that I became a believer when I was at college. And so during my 20s, I was obviously trying to figure out what to do with myself. But the connection between my faith and then seeing how the United States government worked at kind of the top level was a very interesting set of experiences the Lord used to kind of push me forward in understanding, a lot of different areas and interests. So that was kind of my first career, was in engineering. And then in 1991, we were living in Israel at the time, and the Lord just made it really clear, it's time for you to go do something else now. I'm done with that part of your training, and so now you're going to go do something else. And so that was move to Chicago and go to Trinity. And so that's where in the fall of 1991, I met Dennis sitting in the chapel, contemplating the birth of his first child, wondering whether he could stay there or afford to stay. And we became close friends, though we're very different, as I even write in the book. We approach everything about what we do from a different perspective. There's been a bond that's happened, a friendship that has carried us into a lot of different, really important, I think, ideas and ministry situations. So my second part of my world was being at Trinity, being trained there, eventually being trained in practical theology. And I stayed there, was asked to stay by Dr. David Larson, who was my mentor there, to teach preaching courses and leadership courses for about 15 years, I guess. I was in the Chicagoland area, teaching at Trinity and then pastoring a little church in the city of Chicago, right in the mix of, urban world. So did that. And then in 2005, I was asked to take a church back in Lafayette, Indiana. So I went around the world and eventually ended up back where Debbie and I got married in Lafayette, or where we were for our first year. And pastored a little church pastored a good-sized church, actually, for a very short period of time. And that's another part of the story I tell at the beginning of that book, is that what I thought was going to be the next part of my life and career turned out not to be. Didn't stay at that church for very long for a number of reasons. But when I did leave, this kind of third stage now of my ministry and life has begun. It's taken now about 12 years to get settled into it. But I realized that my passion, even when we were in seminary, was not as much as I love the theology and I love studying languages and I love the material, even teaching guys how to preach, which I really enjoyed. I realized that my heartbeat was for the guys themselves, guys and gals who were going to become the next generation of leaders, both in the church and in the world around us. And I realized that there were some significant gaps in how they prosecuted their lives that would keep them from being the productive, helpful, thriving leaders that I knew they could become. So I think the seed of this started way back in seminary. And so for the last 12 years, we've been working together specifically to work with next generation leaders. And so I guess I call what I do leadership development, but even that's kind of a loaded term because it really means something different than probably you would hear if you were talking about a business leader developing someone, or even someone in a classroom or in a school. When you say leadership development, often it's not talking about your heart. It's talking about your skills. It's talking about how much you know or what you can do. And my sense and our sense of leadership development is to say, what would it look like if you allowed God to actually flow through your life all the time, like Jesus did. When Jesus lived his life as the best example of a leader who's ever lived, he did that simply by listening to his Father and doing and saying what his Father was doing. And I think that's kind of where we're going ultimately, is to say, what does it look like for you to lead by listening to your Father?
One of the things that stands out to me as I'm hearing both of you talk, the holiness tradition, and then obviously a very heavy emphasis on the third person of the Trinity here from you, John. The emphasis, of course, is that which we do not see. And one of the things that I think Christians really stink at these days is listening to the Spirit of God. There's about 20 different questions that I want to talk about outside of even the questions that are on this page, which I doubt we'll even get to. But beyond that, I wanted to say what both of you, and what seems to be the sense of things, is that there's this symbiosis between not only you as individual people, but you coming together as a partnership, and beyond that, an interdisciplinary connectivity between your sciences and the development of how you think about those things. So take a moment to talk about that, to talk about this symbiosis, this interdisciplinarity, this warping and woofing, if you will, these things that are bringing two things together.
I think, well, obviously, John, you come out of the church theology direction, come with your engineering degree, so that brings a certain way of thinking. And I come out of psychology, counseling, and education. And so oftentimes we will come at an issue where he will come at it from a kind of an articulated biblical anthropology, and he'll bring that piece in, and I'll come from this direction of, well, this is all worked out in a human context, so I'm going to talk about what's going on in a human context. And usually we meet in the middle on that, but it provides really fruitful and productive conversation when we come at it from those directions.
Yeah. And to just begin kind of using the vocabulary of three paths out of paradise, you know, this idea of root sins, which we heard about, root motivators, if you want to use that term, root longings, whatever is the better. Sometimes sin is a word that gets in the way of helping people hear. But as we talk about these root longings, the pride, the idolatry, and the unbelief, or in this case, the respect, the value, and the need to be loved. Well, I come at things from this sense of the pride root sin, which means that I'm right. And whether or not you actually know that, you know, will be seen. But I approach everything from this perspective that I either have this figured out or I will get it figured out, because clarity is very clarity, competence, not being a failure. Essentially, I don't know if I can say this on the radio, but essentially, I don't want to suck.
Yeah.
And a lot of people live their life basically trying to figure out how not to suck.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I approach everything from that sense of competence and information and clarity. Let's get clarity about this. And I'll bang away on something until I get what I believe to be clarity. Dennis approaches things from what we call the root sin of unbelief, which means that avoiding conflict, where I would run into a conflict because it would bring me clarity, Dennis will run away from a conflict because it makes him feel uncomfortable. So avoiding pain is going to be very important for Dennis. So as we approach a problem, a conflict, a situation, a class, any situation that we have come at together, we've had to learn how to let the other person's spirit kind of changed root motivation come to bear in that situation. So Dennis is really, really good at feeling what's going on in somebody, being really aware of what their emotional response is going to be if we approach an issue with them, because if I don't pay attention to that, I might give them truth all day long. I might be very, very clear with them, but until their hearts change, until their emotions move, they're not going anywhere. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it just, we like to describe it, John. I describe him as blunt force trauma. When we need it broken to fix, then that's John. And I come in stiletto, I'll stick you and you'll bleed out your back before you know it. But it does. It's just bringing the gifts to bear. Even as we talk about these root sins, and once they're understood and the entitlements of them are let down, what blossoms is giftedness and a way to move the kingdom forward, even from someone like myself who kind of grew up in that holiness tradition, which is very rule based in some ways, but to be able to move understand that, understand my nuance in that, and even move to courage out of that place, and that brings kingdom momentum with someone.
One of the things that strikes me to say, since we're all teachers here, I'll just make this comment about teaching, that nobody teaches because they think they're wrong.
No.
Okay, so everybody teaches because they think they're right. So let's just defend teachers at this moment. But the second thing I wanted to bring to everybody's attention, which really comes to the title of your book, The Three Paths, is this Latin word trivium, or trivia, which literally means three ways. So you've got tri, which means three, and via, which means ways. In the ancient world, when you had three roads converge, this would be a place where people would share information and knowledge with each other and tell stories about, hey, what just happened 20 miles back or whatever. Talk about the paths converging and the necessity of seeing those things do that in your work.
Well, the paths that have converged for us have been, one, our different trainings. And so, as Dennis has been trained in the counseling field and the mental health field, and I was trained in engineering and theology. So the first paths that came together were, what do we each bring from our knowledge base and the way we approach problems from those two things. One of the things I was going to say as we were talking about how we work together is, one of the you basically have two ways of looking at someone when they're sitting across the table from you, and you look at them and you see their gifts, you see their abilities, you see their background. You're going to look at them in one of two ways. They're either going to be a threat or they're going to be a gift. Mm-hmm. And when I'm sitting in a circle with other people, other pastors, other leaders, and I'm looking at that room, I sit there and think, I could look at everyone else in this room as competition to me. Mm. They could be a threat. Mm. Or you would look at them as a threat to, you feeling comfortable, being able to relate to them emotionally in a way that was helpful to you. Mm. But whatever, we can look at people as threats, or we can look at them as gifts and say, you contribute something of absolute necessity to this situation. And if you weren't here, it wouldn't happen. Mm. If we take on that attitude, whether it's with one person, whether it's with our spouse, whether it's with our friend, or with someone we're in conflict with, or a room full of our peers that we're all trying to get something done, if I look at everybody around the room and say, how do you slot in here? How are you a gift and not a threat to me? Mm-hmm. That's going to produce an environment, an atmosphere where we really can thrive. So the one path has been this kind of allowing our two sets of trainings to come together. Another path that has come together is how God has allowed us into various different circumstances. Both of us enjoy teaching, but teaching very different subjects in different ways, especially pulling us together, for example, when we were overseas. So I spent a lot of time teaching in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and in Croatia, and Hungary, and Czech, and a number of Eastern European schools. But Dennis came with me on a number of those trips. And what's interesting is when you're in a cross-cultural environment, the need to see each other as gifts is really, really important, because now we need both of our sets of gifts to translate this into this culture that we're in, and not just be Americans that come and just plunk down ideas on top of them, but actually be willing to listen. And Dennis is just really, really good at listening to the heart of someone and saying, John, your information is really good, but are you seeing what's the effect it's having on this person over here? Maybe if you said it this way, maybe they would get it. Mm-hmm. So that's another path has been. And then in the classroom, just recently, we had a really amazing experience in teaching the material on this, plus the material on conflict that the second book is about. Why do you describe that?
It was it's kind of set up as a lab course where we did some content dump on in the morning. And
it was a doctor of ministry
course,
week-long seminar.
And then the afternoons, they were to bring conflicts out of their ministry context. And so we just kind of circled up and just started to apply the material a day to the conflicts. And what we found, what was very interesting, was seeing tenured ministry leaders just feeling deeply inadequate about their ability to navigate conflict. And as we help them through conflict, inevitably what we started to do was say, okay, now what's coming out of your heart is something here. And so it wasn't a therapy class, but it was definitely therapeutic in a way. And what we started to do, where oftentimes people would come in and the scenarios presented were, you're the problem here. We were able to take that, and they were able to embrace the idea of, okay, here's what I brought to the conflict, and here's what I need to attend to. And when I do that, I go to peace, and I'm able now to reach out and take what's gifted here and help shepherd what's going on. It was a powerful experience.
And what was especially powerful for us was, now we've taught this material on conflict in a lot of settings, and most of the time it's been in a master's degree course at the seminary. This was the first time we've been asked to put it together for this group of basically our peers. Yeah. Some of them were even older than us, but these were military chaplains. These were guys. We had a Nigerian priest. We had guys from India, Korea, across the world, and this group of people who didn't really know each other all came together, and in discussing our struggles with how to deal with pain, we became a community. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting about that is that in Kurt Thompson's book, The Soul of Shame, he's written 2 books, The Anatomy of Shame and The Soul of Shame. These are the most important books that we have encountered on how to deal with the idea of shame. Mm. These seminal writing in this area. Mm. So Kurt Thompson talks about what happens with our brains on shame. He's a neurobiologist, and he's actually done the physiological study of the brain to see what happens when our brains encounter various emotional things. And
we're going to take a break here, just so when we come back off this break, I'm really interested in this neurobiology, because that's in education, and as an educator, this is a really powerful concept. But let's come back to that after our break. We're going to take a 1-song break. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Drs. Humphrey and Erickson about this concept of what does it mean to be a mentor to the emerging leadership of the next generation, following up with our themes here this morning. Listening to Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We'll be right back.
Yeah, basically you just push play on us and we.
Yeah.
Yes, I can tell. I needed to bust into the two of you there. And
the neurobiology piece is particularly important because that's a piece that the church has a hard time getting its head around.
See, and I didn't want to break in the middle of that, so I wanted to break ahead of the neurobiology thing. Something, just for the sake of saying this, one of the things that I've been teaching students for years, and this, by the way, comes out of Deuteronomy 1, is that when God said, okay, if you're 20 years of age and younger, okay, you're going to be the next generation. So there's a reason for that. In neurobiology, we know that the frontal lobe is not fully formed yet.
That's at 23.
There you go. So, when we talk about neurobiology, and I want to say to people who aren't theologians, do you know God already established this in Deuteronomy 1? You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think it brings in huge opportunities to adjust ministry.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Have you guys read the book Rare Leadership? Leadership. That book has a lot to do with neurobiology, by the way, for the sake of saying it. And this kind of thing actually popped out there. I was kind of surprised and pleased to see it, but there's a lot of studies in neurobiological connections there. And I just wanted to say one thing about the microphones, especially because you guys are being seen. There you go. If you would put this down,
okay,
and just so that it's out of your face, but then put it up, and then speak closer, like this close, thereabouts, and that way the sound comes through better. But I know when I push play, it's just you guys go, man.
We've been talking to each other for 17 years.
But so basically, just in terms of the stuff that I want to make, this Kurt Thompson stuff on shame is important, and I was going to make a point about that because it leads very quickly into this. Yes. The point that if you read this book, that he says that shame essentially does 2 things. It basically disassociates our brain. It takes our brain apart neurobiologically so that the parts of our brain that are supposed to be working together don't work together anymore. So base emotion that happens back here never makes its way up here to get processed correctly and sits back here, and we act out of it out here rather than up here. And so shame whispers all the time into our brains, keep everything separate, don't work together, disassociate. Well, what that does is it disassociates us in relationships as well.
So if you were going to start with one of those books, which one should I buy first?
The Soul of Shame. The Anatomy of Shame is just basically his study in the area. Yeah. It's more technical, and if you're a doctor, but he's a physician. Okay. So the second one is the one where he takes that information and he pushes it out into this area. Okay. Very, very powerful. If he's on the circuit now, if you could ever have him actually come on your show, oh man.
Is he anywhere close to us?
I don't know where he lives. He lives in Does he live on the East Coast? I don't know where he is.
Oh,
But
well.
he travels.
You can see a lot of his stuff on. He's got a lot of it too.
Has he done a TED Talk yet? He hasn't. I think he may be scheduled.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so all that to say, but the interesting thing about that is it disassociates your brain, and it also pushes you into isolation.
Okay.
And so in the garden, the first thing that happened when they ate and shame fell over them, the first thing they did was hide.
Yeah,
They hid from each other and they hid from God.
He does his Genesis work really well in that book.
And so some of that is in that interlude that I talk about in that book. But this idea of disassociation and isolation are what shame does. And so the antidote to those, which is what we're talking about, is to put your brain back together. Okay. And so the way you do this is you need community and you need vulnerability. Okay. So vulnerability puts your brain back together. Community,
Yes, sir.
thwarts shame's ability to isolate you.
We here to see.
Okay. That leads directly into why we do what we do.
This is vital for the church because the secular therapy world has figured this one out.
Come on in. Come on in. Good to see you, Merlin. Come on over. Have a seat. Sneak in there in the back.
The other piece of all of this that I wanted to basically address here was when it comes to, and you picked this up in your first hour, but emerging adults, this term emerged by Jeffrey Arnett coined this in the 2004 book that he wrote, picked up basically to say from your 20s to the 30s is the most important part of your life to be growing and learning all the skills you need to move on. Used positively. Negative, it's just an extended period of pre-adulthood where you don't get anything done. But we want to see it positively. 4 questions that they're asking.
Hang on just a second. Let me come in here a second. And we are back. Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We are here at 2131 East 10th Street, right across the street from the Bonner Center. Come by and wave at us through our wonderfully lovely plate glass windows. We'd love to see you here. We are spending time here today talking about serving emerging adults with Doctors Humphrey and Erickson. And Merlin Gonzalez has just joined us here from Faith, Hope, and Love. Good morning, Merlin. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
We're glad for your voice as well. We just paused here at the segment just as we were coming into the music. We had just paused talking about the importance of neurobiology and a point that you were making there. So if you wanted to go back to highlight this again and then drive it forward into the point that you wanted to make about emerging adults.
So before the break, we were talking about a really seminal work. In fact, even Merlin has been exposed to this at a table talk that we did for his organization about Kurt Thompson's book called The Soul of Shame. And in that book, just very briefly, he talks about how shame does 2 things to us, why it's so powerful and why it is so relationship destroying. One is basically what he talks about is that shame neurobiologically separates the different functions of your brain so that your brain can't work together as well. So when it's all together, when you have an emotion in the base part of your brain, it eventually gets worked up into the frontal cortex, so it gets processed correctly by all the things you know and believe that are true. What shame does is it attempts to disassociate, and he's actually proven how this happens. He's watched it happen with MRIs. It pulls your brain apart so that this never makes it here. And so you act out of the base instinct, the base emotion, rather than one that's been processed by what you know is true. And so when that happens, then you respond in ways that are purely from your base instincts, which are going to be to protect yourself or to
fight or flight.
Fight or whatever you do that wouldn't be something that you would want normally to do, especially if you're a believer. The other thing that shame does is, and you see this in the first part of the Bible, when Adam and Eve, sinned, they ate fruit they weren't supposed to eat. Shame descended over them, and the first thing they did was they hid. They hid from each other, and they hid from their Father God. The second thing shame does is it isolates us, and it pushes us constantly to isolate. Well, you know how this feels when you've done something that, even as a kid, you knew when you did something that your mother or father didn't want you to do, what'd you do? You went and hid, right? Your typical reaction was, I'm ashamed, and so I'm going to hide. Well, what Thompson talks about in the book is the antidote to those things, the thing that actually allows you to live shame-free in a relationship, are things that put your brain back together and actually avoid isolation. And those are vulnerability, which is actually disclosure that is empathetic toward other people, mutually sharing empathetic truth, vulnerability, and community. And community is when you choose to be in intimate relationships with one another, though you could get hurt again, your trust could be violated, but when you choose to be in community, it thwarts the shame that would otherwise drive your relationships. So the reason I talk about that, the power of shame, is because that's one of the things that in mentoring we are having to do all the time. We have three things that, when we talk about why we do this, well, there's a gap here. These young folks, young men and women, they don't know their hearts very well. They don't know how their hearts work. They don't know their Bibles very well. They don't have a sense of the warp and woof, so to speak, of Scripture's story. So they don't put the pieces together. And then they don't really know God very well. They have a very indistinct or incorrect view of what his character is and how he operates. And if you can give them those things back, how does your heart work? What does the Bible say? Who is God for you? Man, you are moving very rapidly into creating someone who's going to be able to move well.
And what you do when that's happening, you're closing the gap between what ultimately they know to be true and believe, and then living that truth. Shame is often what sits in between that. Because people will say, well, I believe that to be true, but then why am I doing this? Or why am I in this conflict? And we focus a lot on guilt, and we need to, substitutionary atonement and, Christ's work on the cross to alleviate our legal sin guilt. But this idea of shame, this often is the piece that we're not talking about that's hampering people, that's preventing people from moving forward into wholeness and into kingdom work.
Merlin, when you invited these gentlemen to give a table talk, what was your intention there? Why did you want them to speak to this particular issue at your venue?
That's a very good question. I met John at one of the meetings, and it feels like there's a connection between his expertise, his studies about shame, and the general population that we serve at the food pantry. Actually, with this Faith, Hope, and Love Week coming up July 22 to 28, we are going to make more awareness that the root causes of hunger is really not lack of food, maybe food access, but really it's deeply rooted in probably shame, guilt, and some other things that our mind were conditioned. We have our own reality that may not be the true reality. So we're not saying that we know all the reality, but at the same time, if we can just, take one step at a time and maybe shame and explain that by an expert, I think we can start becoming more aware. Because as we talked about in the past, that awareness starts. When awareness starts, then change can continue.
So am I going to be able to overcome my addiction to the legal white powder of sugar?
Well, it depends on the level of shame, probably.
I just thought I'd throw that in there for some levity. This is an important idea, and I'm always happy. This just brings to mind the whole point of the show is that we're connecting people around Indianapolis. This is a thrill for me to have you all here and talk about these things. So let's now talk about this connection to emerging adults. Merlin, I just was at your table talk last week and heard a young man speak, very affable, good, research-based kind of guy. But gentlemen, you speak now to and speak into the lives of these young people. What is all of what you've said thus far making a difference in their lives? What is it that you've said that is so important to them that you see change and the reason why you want to see Eden Consulting continue?
So there are, at root, 4 questions that we're all asking all the time. And everything we do in our life is somehow trying to get at the answer to one of these four questions. Who am I? The question of identity. Why am I here? A question of purpose. Where am I going? A question of direction. And does anybody really love me? A question of intimacy. So there's the question of identity and purpose and direction and intimacy drive everything we search for in this life. And the fifth question that comes is, and who is going to help me find the answers to those four questions? That fifth question is why we have mentoring.
Yeah.
Okay. Mentoring in our hearts is the idea of helping you hear what God's answer is to those four questions every time you encounter them in your life. So when Jeffrey Arnett in 1995 asked some hundred people from the ages of 19 to 26, I think was the range, or 18 to 25, or in that range, asked them a bunch of questions about what their career goals were, what their purpose is, why were they still living at home, et cetera, across cultures, across languages, across socioeconomic status. He asked these questions, and he got some very similar answers from across those different spectra. And they were these, essentially worded differently, they were essentially questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Does anybody really love me? Now, he didn't answer, those weren't the way they said them, but those were the questions they asked. And he said, what would happen if you actually understood that instead of seeing the 20s as just a place where people have chosen not to grow up yet, but that's why he called it emerging adult, because adulthood was emerging through the 20s. Our friend Rick Dunn and Janice Sundin at Trinity, they wrote a book called Shaping the Journey of Emerging Adults. And they took the opposite tack. They looked at the data that Arnett had pulled out and this idea of emerging adults. And they said, what would it look like if we actually created an atmosphere where an emerging adult could use their 20s in a way when they emerged out of their 20s, were ready to move into leadership in whatever their world was. So they said, how can we shape the journey of an emerging adult so that they can move? And you know what's very interesting? It's discipleship, but it isn't our common, let's get out a book and let's work through a notebook and let's read our Bible every day for 10 minutes. Some of those things can be good. Essentially, they said, you want to walk with them, you need to actually be with them, and you need to actually listen to them, and you actually need to bring wisdom into their lives. And it's relational. Discipleship is at root. Mentoring is at root relational.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I teach, my favorite course to teach is undergrad human sexuality. And
of course it is.
Yeah. It's a compelling
topic. You have 4 children.
I have 4 children. I've done my job for the kingdom. Leave me alone. But and we start off with a discussion of shame, but the theme of the class is this is all everything we're talking about, from the biology to the relational to the problems and everything. And what I find, and you found this as well, is when a millennial or a young emerging adult gets an inkling that someone knows their heart, there are 2 things that are happening. There's a draw to it and there's a fear of it. And so at that point, the approach, that relational approach, they're willing to just kind of stay back and not pounce or not put your hand on the tiller, so to speak, for them. They will stay around. And so they get it. They get that there's something going on in their heart, and they haven't figured it out. And when they find someone they trust that can help them, they're in.
And so I know we're talking a lot here, but if there was a takeaway from this show that I could say, how do you do this? How do you mentor someone? Well, obviously I'm willing to spend time with them. But what do you do? The next question is always, well, what do I do? Well, so I was thinking about this. What is over 25, 30 years of us doing this? What do we actually do? And I realized that being a preacher, I like alliteration. So the 5 Ps, it's actually, what we do is the 5 Ps of mentoring are patience, Okay, that means that I can wait and see what Jesus is going to do with this person. I don't need to figure it out for myself. Basically, Jesus has got this. Patience, peace. So I have to approach this idea of a relationship with somebody from a place of peace, not my agenda. I'm not worried about whether Jesus knows them way better than I do. I approach from a place of Jesus' peace. Process, which means they're in a process and they're in a pace, and I have to match my pace with the Spirit's pace and that person's pace in the process. This is a process of them working through this. It's not going to happen all in one day. Peace, pace is process, and then purpose. Why am I in this relationship? What's my goal? Is it for me to show how much I know? Is it for me to prove that I know how to be a mentor? Or is it your heart? Or what's my purpose here, for this relationship? And then the last one is permission. And permission is extremely important. And this is what Dennis was getting at in this last thing. Sometimes you have to wait for permission. I have to tell my guys all the time, older guys, don't assume permission. Don't assume permission from the Spirit, and don't assume permission from the person to go where you think they need to go. This is going to, even Merlin, in dealing with the kind of culture that you're working in, how extremely important permission is. To not assume just because someone came in and said, "Can I have a bag of food?" that they've given you permission to do anything else in their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, speak to that, please.
I had made my mistakes by assuming and not asking permission. And just so glad to hear what you're talking about here, John, because again, out in the public, it's easy to assume things. It's easy to think that, hey, we are helping you and you should adjust to our system. Of course, we need to have a system and procedure, but at the same time, I think that sensitivity, that relational human aspect is more important than system and procedures.
Well, that sounds like what we do at Millennials. We actually spend time with Christian young people. How about that?
Yeah.
And we listen. How about that?
I think the other thing with that is, we've been talking a lot about millennials, and we're talking out like they're raccoons or something like that. But
In the wild.
In the wild, yeah. But when we wait on permission, what I find is I'm learning about me. When I wait, what my preconceived idea is, it's like, oh, okay.
Yep.
I just found my bias. I found my, that piece that I need to learn as I wait.
The older I get, I give people space and grace.
Yeah.
I just give them more and more opportunity for latitude and movement, instead of trying to box them in,
Yeah, there's a sense here with this permission piece. Again, you're learning about yourself, but each one of these generations that comes through, now they're shorter. It used to be that it was 40 years and then 20 and then 10. Now I'm noticing with every 2 years of college students, I'm getting a different bit of a sense. So that we've been throwing around terms like emerging adult and millennial, and I think that this generation is, because if you were born between 1980 and 2000, I think you were a millennial. But now we have, for the first time, I now know people who were born in 3 different centuries. My grandmother was born in the 19th century. My grandparents, everyone that I know, was probably born in the 20th century, and now I'm meeting kids for the first time born in the 21st century that are coming in. And all of them are different. But what's interesting is you wait patiently. So if the term millennials and emerging adults and young people and all these get thrown around, but technically millennials are this generation that now are getting older. They're in their 30s now, some of the older ones. Millennials will float just like Gen X and boomers, and everybody will float through society, and they will keep some of their traits as they go through. But others will come up behind them with different names on their generation, and I don't know what the next one's called. I probably should. But what's interesting is the concept of emerging adults stays the same in this process in the way we're talking about it, because this time from 20 to 30 in your life, no matter what your generation is called, is still the most critical part of your growth process for the rest of your life. Everything you learn in your 20s, just like they said, everything you learn in kindergarten, you know, everything you learn and grow and do in your 20s is going to be the platform for how you're going to lead and proceed in your life.
Yeah. These are powerful thoughts, powerful ideas, so things that certainly we want everybody to hear about it. Let's take a few moments. We've got about 7 minutes left in our program. Let's take a few moments just to explain Eden Consulting. And then I'd also like to know how, Merlin, from your vantage point, how you see this connection with Eden Consulting as being something beneficial to what you're doing at Faith, Hope, and Love. So let's take like 2 minutes, gentlemen, to talk about Eden Consulting. Let's flip it over to Merlin and see that connection.
Well, it emerged out of our passion for mentoring young people. And so what we're really on the front end of developing, the book being the first big push out of providing resources, perspective, where emerging adults can come, talk about their ideas, talk about what's going on. And we in turn can resource them, bring them things that are happening in their life for them.
Yep. So our passion is to see emerging adults arrive at the end of that decade with the tools, the resources, the heart, and the sense that they know how to go out and be the leaders for their in whatever field that they're in. So we, as you said, we want to provide them with the relationship that builds the awareness of their hearts, awareness of Scripture, awareness of who God is in a relational context that allows them to grow into who God created them to be in an intentional way.
So how does this kind of consultation help somebody like yourself, Merlin? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think, God really put us together, John. I remember when we first met, you said, so what's your world? And yeah, we have different experiences. We have different ways how we live life and how we deal with others. And yeah, we deal with the food insecure. And again, based on experience that we had in the past several years, we found out that really food is not. I don't think, this is my belief, is that it's not that we have scarcity of food in the city. I think it's more of the relationship, it's the connection, it's the collaboration, the networking, and putting things together. Bringing that John 17, the unity in the body of Christ, how we can work together. I was interviewing the mayor of Westfield a couple of weeks ago, and he also agreed that, yes, the government has role in that, the churches, the community, but at the same time, at the root of it is the connection in the community. Because, we heard about the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, but at the same time also it takes a village. The village, the community, the local community is the answer. What we can do probably is to affect the change, to affect that atmosphere where people can start seeing that there is different reality than what they are brought to since they were born. So, very, very great information that, Mark had shed light on my walk in this, but at the same time also Dennis and John. So for us in the next, July 22 to 28, which is the 13th annual Faith, Hope, and Love Week, our theme is Beyond This Hunger. So we connected with another organization called Beyond This. He created a manual, which probably, John, you and I will just maybe have a cup of coffee one of these days, but he has like 20 different sections that he put together 5 years ago, and he's been using it, and it's proven based on the statistics, the results of younger generation, the youth, and even he's developing a curriculum now called Beyond This Divorce, and then Beyond This, say, bankruptcy or whatever. So our focus this time in the week of Faith, Hope, and Love Week is Beyond This Hunger. Beyond a bag of food, beyond a bandage, and beyond, just saying, hey, I'll pray for you. What else can we do as a community? And I think, with that awareness, we need to bring that, and that's why we're inviting you, Mark, and John, maybe you also, Dennis, to embark to do what we call 001, which means that you will boycott breakfast and lunch, and then you'll just eat dinner. This is by choice. For many people, it's not their choice, it's their way of life, eating one meal a day. But we will be able to experience, because again, experience, we can have all the research, and yes, you know that, but unless you actually experience things, then I think it will be more effective to really connect with the people. So we're going to have the 001. We're going to chronicle, tell the story, how it feels to be hungry, and then with that, we're going to encourage the community, and hopefully this will become viral and really understand the mystery of
This
hunger.
is a great outreach that Merlin Gonzalez Faith, Hope, and Love is embarking upon. Dennis and John, I want to give you each 30 seconds to give us one thing that you'd like us to remember forever. One idea that will never leave our minds. If you want to leave us with one thing today, what would it be, Dennis?
The theme for my class, it's all about the heart. If they just dial down what's going on in my heart, what's going on in this other person's heart. They start there.
Very good. John?
In a similar way, I would say that your relationships will either flounder or flourish based on how well you know your own heart.
These are powerful men in our communities. Dennis, of course, coming from Chicago, but John and Merlin here in Indianapolis, we're grateful for your time and your energy here today, talking about these very important ideas about bringing up the next generation of young people. Next week on Warp and Woof Radio, we'll be talking with Leon Longard, who is a local pastor here, also concerned about community and specifically outreach to those who do not have a voice and sometimes don't have a place to live. So Leon Longard will be with us next week. And then in 2 weeks, we're actually going to take the day off. We've never done this before, but we're going to take July 4th off. I think for obvious reasons, I hope it would be obvious to everybody, to celebrate our nation's history. And so you've been listening to Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You hear us every Wednesday from 10 until noon. We'll be back again next week, but until then, see you then.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time and your energy. Merlin, thanks for stopping by.
Oh, yes, yeah.
We're grateful for this.
Very, very good.
Connection.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
So I've been reading into that and thinking about what ways, other than doing the 001 in that, what would be helpful for us as we connect to that for you? How can we support you? What do you need from us other than just our testimony and our money, obviously?
And probably just to push that idea and to get others to really understand, because we're going against the grain here. Because right now, again, I think we spoke about that before, is that the success is based on output, how many people we serve and how many pounds, instead of outcome, which is how many people's lives were changed because of doing that.
Right.
So probably, we're open to ideas, so we can push that awareness to people. So we have people now in Alabama and other states that are going to do this. So, Dennis, if you feel like, hey, this is something that you would like to start sharing. I was in Chicago a couple of days ago, and seems like Indianapolis is more panhandler than Chicago. I'm saying that.
Yeah, they've really cleared the downtown area of Panhandle.